From the moment your eyes first open in the morning, the world rushes in with its familiar story. You look around, you see objects, walls, people, routines, and you accept the silent message they all repeat. You are a physical body in a physical world, moving through time like everyone else. A solid creature made of flesh and bone, born, living, aging, dying, simple, ordinary, contained. But there is a deeper truth humming beneath that simplicity. A truth so old and so fundamental that it almost hides itself in plain sight. Not because it's mystical, not because it's forbidden, but because the lens through which you've been taught to see reality is too narrow, too small, too outdated to reveal what's actually happening. For 300 years, the world has been shaped by a worldview that treats matter as primary, consciousness as a side effect, and you as a static object in a universe of separate things. And you never questioned it. Why would you? It was baked into your textbooks, your science classes, your culture, your language. It became the quiet architecture of your daily experience. But something cracks inside you the moment you pause and ask the question most people avoid. What if I'm not what I've been told I am? Because the truth is this: you are not a fixed physical thing trapped inside a biological container. You are not just a brain producing thoughts like a machine. You are not a character following a rigid script called my life. Your true nature is something far stranger, far more fluid, far more powerful. You are a field of awareness experiencing itself through a human form. Not limited by it, not produced by it, not confined to it. You are the observer behind every thought, every sensation, every memory. And the moment you shift your attention from I am the body to I am the one who is aware of the body, something extraordinary happens. The entire story of your existence begins to unravel and rebuild itself. Because once you see yourself as awareness, even for a brief moment, the boundaries of your identity loosen, the edges of your fears soften, the weight of your past loses its authority, and you begin to sense a deeper intelligence operating beneath the surface of everything, including you. An intelligence that never forces, never shouts, never demands. It simply waits for you to notice it. This is the beginning of remembering who you actually are, not a physical organism trying to survive, but a conscious presence learning how to wake up inside the human experience. And once you wake up, even slightly, you can never fully go back to sleep. Most people move through life convinced that reality is something happening to them. A fixed sequence of events they must react to, survive, adapt to, endure. They wake up each day inside the same mental cage. The past defines me. The world limits me. Circumstances control me. They don't realize that this entire structure isn't real. It's a story they inherited. A story so old, so deeply layered into the mind that they mistake it for truth. But the moment you begin to question the origin of your thoughts, the solidity of your emotions, and the automatic nature of your reactions, something subtle begins to shift. It's like the edges of your reality start to blur. The limits you once accepted begin to feel optional. You start noticing that behind every impulse, every belief, every fear, there is a watcher, you, quietly observing the entire internal world. And this raises a radical possibility. If you can observe your thoughts, then your thoughts cannot be you. If you can witness your emotions, then your emotions cannot be you. If you can watch your memories, your reactions, your identity, then none of these things are actually you. You are the awareness behind them. This single realization begins to dismantle the illusion that you've been living inside a rigid, predetermined life. Awareness isn't passive. It isn't empty. It isn't a background. It is the creative force through which your entire experience is shaped. The mind doesn't produce awareness. Awareness produces the mind. And the moment you step into that understanding, even for a breath, reality becomes less like a prison and more like a mirror, a reflection of the state of consciousness you're operating from. Think about it. When you're anxious, the world looks threatening. When you're hopeful, possibilities appear. When you're confident, obstacles shrink. The world isn't changing and you are. Your state of being is the lens through which reality emerges. This is the secret most people never learn. You're not responding to the world. You're responding to your internal frequency, and the world responds back to it. Your external life is an echo of your internal state. This is why some people stay stuck. They keep trying to change their circumstances without changing the consciousness generating those circumstances. They fight the mirror instead of transforming the one who is looking into it. But once you understand that consciousness shapes perception, and perception shapes experience, you stop trying to control the external. and start mastering the internal. You stop waiting for life to shift, you begin shifting yourself. And when the inner world changes, the outer world follows like a shadow. This is where the waking up process truly begins. There comes a moment in every awakening where the ground beneath your old identity begins to shake. Not violently, not dramatically, but quietly, like a fault line deep under the surface finally shifting. You start to realize that the version of you've been carrying all these years was never solid, never fixed, never final. It was a structure built from habits, memories, fears, expectations, and stories you didn't even choose. A psychological costume you learned to live inside. And once you see the cracks in that costume, you can't unsee them. You begin to notice how much of your life has been lived on autopilot. The same thoughts repeating, the same emotions recycling, the same patterns replaying like a program running in the background. You weren't living. You were remembering how to live based on yesterday's script. Every reaction, every belief, every limitation was just the past echoing into the present. But here's the revelation most people never touch. You don't have to be the echo. You can be the interruption. The moment you become aware of a pattern, you're no longer trapped inside it. The spell breaks. Awareness creates space, and in that space, something new becomes possible. A different choice, a different response, a different version of you. This is where your old identity begins to dissolve. Not by force, but by understanding. You start observing the mind instead of obeying it. You stop taking the emotional storms personally. You watch your inner reactions the way you'd watch weather passing across the sky. And slowly, the one who is watching, the awareness becomes more real than the thoughts you're watching. When this shift happens, even subtly, the architecture of your life changes. You stop identifying with the wounds that once defined you. You stop repeating the same emotional cycles. You stop mistaking temporary states for permanent truths. You see that every fear, every insecurity, every limiting belief is just energy passing through. Consciousness, not a reflection of your worth or potential. And this is where the deeper power awakens. Because the less you cling to the old identity, the more space you create for the authentic self buried underneath it. The self that doesn't need validation, doesn't fear uncertainty, doesn't replay old stories. The self that exists before the world told you who you were supposed to be. This version of you isn't fragile. It isn't reactive. It isn't defined by the past. It's spacious, clear, untouched. The more you rest in this awareness, the more you realize that your entire life has been preparing you for this exact moment, the moment you stop being the character and start becoming the consciousness that creates the character. This is the threshold where transformation becomes inevitable, not because you're forcing it, but because you're finally becoming who you were always meant to be. There is a point in every inner journey where the shift stops being philosophical and becomes visceral, something you don't just understand, but feel in the center of your being. It usually happens in an ordinary moment. Sitting alone in your room, walking down a street, lying awake at night. Suddenly, without warning, you sense a quiet presence beneath your thoughts, a stillness behind your emotions, a subtle awareness that isn't affected by anything happening in your mind. And for the first time, you recognize it as you, not the you shaped by the world, but the deeper consciousness that's been silently witnessing every moment of your life, the part that never ages, never panics, never breaks, the part that has been with you through every high and every collapse and untouched, unshaken, constant. This recognition changes everything. Because when you stabilize in this deeper awareness, the external world loses its power to control your internal state. People's opinions stop imprisoning you. Old fears stop running your decisions. Your past stops dictating your present. You no longer get pulled into every thought that appears in your mind. You start choosing which ones deserve your energy. This is the beginning of true freedom. And with this freedom comes a new level of responsibility. Not the heavy, burdensome kind, but the empowering realization that your inner state is no longer random. You start to understand the mechanics of your consciousness. You notice how certain thoughts dim your awareness while others expand it, how some emotions constrict your energy while others open it, how your attention, the most powerful force you possess, is shaping your life moment by moment. Once you see this, you stop treating your mind like an enemy and start treating it like a tool. You learn to direct it, guide it, train it. You become intentional with your inner environment. Instead of waiting for peace, you cultivate it. Instead of hoping for clarity, you create it. Instead of seeking validation, you anchor in self-recognition, and slowly something extraordinary unfolds. Your external world starts rearranging itself to match your internal transformation. Opportunities appear where there were none. People respond differently. Situations that once triggered you lose their emotional charge. You start attracting experiences that align with your new state of being, not your old patterns. This is not magic, it's alignment. Your life becomes a reflection of the consciousness you're operating from. And as your awareness expands, so does your reality. This marks the true turning point in your evolution, when you stop living from the programmed mind and start living from awakened presence. When you stop reacting to the world and start shaping it with the frequency you hold inside. You are no longer the echo of your past. You are the architect of your future. As your awareness deepens, you begin to see that the world you've been living in wasn't the world itself. It was a projection of your inner state, a mirror reflecting your beliefs, your conditioning, your wounds, your expectations. And once this becomes clear, something profound shifts inside you. You stop trying to control the mirror and start transforming the one who is looking into it. This is the stage where you realize that your inner world is not just influencing your outer reality, it's generating it. Not in some mystical, symbolic sense, but in a direct, practical, experiential way. Your thoughts shape your perception. Your perception shapes your behavior. Your behavior shapes your life. This cycle has been running unconsciously since childhood, but now, for the first time, you're watching it happen in real time. And with this awareness comes a new challenge. You can no longer hide from yourself. Every thought that dims your energy becomes obvious. Every emotion that pulls you backward, instead of forward, becomes impossible to ignore. Every habit that once felt harmless now reveals its real cost. You begin to see how much of your suffering was created not by your circumstances, but by the unconscious patterns you carried into those circumstances. This is the most uncomfortable part of awakening, and the most liberating. Because once the unconscious becomes conscious, you regain your power. Instead of reacting, you can respond. Instead of collapsing into old emotions, you can observe them without being consumed. Instead of repeating patterns, you can break them with a single moment of awareness. You begin to understand that growth is not about adding anything new to yourself, and it's about removing everything that isn't you. The fear that never belonged to you. The stories that were handed down to you. The limitations you accepted without question. The identities you wore just to survive. Letting them fall away isn't loss. It's return. And with every layer that dissolves, you get closer to the core of your being. A state of consciousness that feels expansive, stable, grounded, and deeply alive. This part of you doesn't need certainty to move forward. It doesn't need approval to feel whole. It doesn't need control to feel safe. It simply is. From this state, life begins to unfold differently. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop chasing validation. You stop clinging to timelines. Instead, you lean into a quieter intelligence inside you, an inner guidance system that doesn't shout but whispers. It speaks through intuition, through synchronicities, through subtle shifts in energy. And the more you trust it, the more your life aligns with a flow that feels both effortless and intentional. This is where you begin living not from the mind's constant noise, but from the truth beneath it. Not from fear, but from awareness. Not from survival, but from consciousness. There comes a time in your evolution when the old patterns don't just feel wrong, they feel impossible to return to. Not because you're forcing change, but because your consciousness has expanded beyond the level where those patterns could survive. What once felt normal now feels heavy. What once felt familiar now feels limiting. What once felt like you now feels like a memory of someone you no longer are. This is the crossing point. The moment you step out of who you've been and into who you are becoming. And it's here you discover something most people never realize. Transformation isn't a single moment. It's a series of quiet internal shifts that accumulate until one day, you look at your old life and it no longer fits. You look at your old stories and they no longer define you. You look at your old fears and they no longer have authority. You haven't changed. You've outgrown. You start to notice a new intelligence guiding you from within, not the loud, anxious voice of the mind trying to control everything, but a deeper presence that feels steady, calm, and unmistakably true. This presence doesn't push, it aligns. It doesn't argue, it reveals. It doesn't demand, it invites. It shows you that everything you've been seeking outside, peace, purpose, clarity, self-respect, was never missing. It was just covered by the noise of an identity you adopted, long before you understood you had the power to choose. And as this deeper presence becomes more familiar, something extraordinary happens. The world you once struggled against begins to soften. People who once triggered you no longer have the same grip. Situations that once drained you now pass through you without leaving scars. Even challenges feel different, less like battles and more like initiations. Opportunities to embody a higher version of yourself. This is not because life changed. It's because you change the level of consciousness you meet life from. Your energy becomes clearer. Your choices become intentional. Your presence becomes grounded. You begin to trust the unfolding, not out of blind hope, but because you finally see how deeply connected you are to the intelligence behind that unfolding. You stop chasing outcomes and start magnetizing them. You stop forcing decisions and start sensing the right ones. You stop living from emotional reactivity and start living from awareness. And as this alignment stabilizes, you realize that you're no longer walking through life. You're co-creating it. This is the stage where your inner work becomes your outer transformation, where your presence becomes your power, where your awareness becomes your compass, where the person you are becoming is no longer a possibility, but a reality unfolding in real time. You're no longer climbing toward your future. You're becoming the version of you that your future already knows. As your awareness stabilizes, a new kind of clarity begins to rise within you, not the intellectual clarity of the mind, but a deeper, quieter knowing that feels like it comes from somewhere beyond thought. It's the kind of clarity that doesn't need proof, doesn't need validation, doesn't need permission. It simply sits inside you like a steady flame, illuminating things you never noticed before. You start to sense patterns in your life that once felt random. You begin to see the hidden architecture behind your experiences. Why certain people entered your story, why certain moments shaped you, why certain challenges kept repeating until you learned what they came to teach. And slowly you understand something profound. Nothing was ever wasted. Nothing was ever accidental. Every part of your journey was leading you to this expansion of consciousness. This is the moment where your inner world and outer world begin to synchronize. You think of someone and they call. You feel a shift inside and life reorganizes around it. You let go of an old belief and new opportunities appear from nowhere. You're not imagining it, you're aligning with a deeper law of consciousness that had always been operating. But now you're finally awake enough to see it. This phase of awakening isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It isn't chaotic. It's subtle, precise, almost surgical in the way it removes what no longer serves you. People drift away not from loss, but because your energy no longer matches theirs. Old desires fade, not from boredom, but because your soul has outgrown them. Even your ambitions transform. They become less about impressing the world and more about expressing your truth. This is where you learn one of the most important lessons. The universe doesn't respond to what you want. It responds to who you are being. And as your being shifts, your life shifts with it. You begin choosing differently, not because you're forcing change, but because you no longer resonate with choices born from fear, scarcity, or expectation. You start valuing your inner peace more than external approval. You stop betraying yourself just to maintain connections. You stop shrinking yourself just to keep the world comfortable. A different kind of strength emerges. Calm, grounded, unshakable. It's the strength of alignment. You feel it in the way you communicate. You feel it in the way you set boundaries. You feel it in the way you carry yourself, even in silence. This stage is not the end of your awakening, but it is the turning point where your inner reality becomes your foundation, your navigation system, your source of truth. A point where you no longer move through life unconsciously, but with intention, presence, and a quiet confidence that doesn't need to be spoken to be felt. This is where you step into a new frequency, one that doesn't chase, doesn't force, doesn't fear. There comes a point in your awakening where the shift is no longer internal, only it starts leaving fingerprints on the world around you. Not because you're trying to prove anything, not because you're trying to be something, but because your very presence has changed. You walk into a room and the energy feels different. You speak and your words carry weight. You stay silent and even your silence communicates something unmistakable. This is when you realize that consciousness is not just something you experience. It's something you radiate. Your energy becomes your language. Your alignment becomes your influence. Your authenticity becomes your power. And this power has nothing to do with dominance or control. It's the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need to convince, doesn't need to argue, doesn't need to defend itself. It's the power of someone who has finally stopped battling their own mind. Someone who is no longer tangled in insecurity, self-doubt, or old emotional loops. Someone whose inner world is no longer chaotic, so their outer world no longer feels threatening. When this happens, people begin to sense you differently. Some feel drawn to you without knowing why. Some feel uncomfortable around you because your presence reflects back the parts of themselves they've been avoiding. Some feel inspired, some feel exposed. But every interaction becomes clearer, cleaner, more truthful. You no longer participate in drama because it simply doesn't resonate with your frequency. You no longer tolerate disrespect because you've learned to respect yourself. You no longer chase connection because you've become connected within. This shift also affects the opportunities that enter your life. Paths that once felt blocked suddenly open. People who align with your growth begin appearing effortlessly. Situations that used to drain you stop showing up because you no longer carry the vibration that attracted them. It's not luck, it's coherence. When your inner world is aligned, your outer world has no choice but to match it. This is also the stage where you begin to feel a deeper sense of purpose. Not the kind defined by society, not the kind measured by achievements, but the kind that rises from your own consciousness. It feels less like ambition and more like inevitability, like a calling that was waiting for you to become the version of yourself who could finally hear it. You start moving differently. You stop wasting energy on things that don't matter. You become intentional with your time, your attention, your relationships. Your life becomes a reflection of what is essential, not what is expected. And the most profound realization emerges. You're no longer trying to become someone. You're revealing who you've always been beneath the noise. You are no longer shaped by the world. You are shaping the world through your consciousness. There comes a moment in your evolution when you realize that awakening isn't just about expanding consciousness. It's about reclaiming the power you unconsciously gave away your entire life. Power to people who didn't understand you. Power to fears that were never truly yours. Power to systems, beliefs, and expectations that shaped you before you ever had the chance to shape yourself. And when this realization hits, something profound shifts. You stop searching for yourself in the external world and start returning to yourself in the internal one. This return is not dramatic. It's not loud. It doesn't come with fireworks or sudden enlightenment. Instead, it arrives like a quiet recognition. A moment where you finally see that every answer you spent years chasing was always inside you, buried under layers of noise, conditioning, and borrowed identities. You begin to see how much of your inner chaos wasn't actually yours. How many of your thoughts were inherited. How many of your fears were learned. How many of your desires were programmed. And with each layer you peel back, the truth becomes clearer. The real you existed long before the world taught you who to be. This is the stage where self-honesty becomes your sharpest tool. You stop lying to yourself about what hurts. You stop pretending you're okay with things that drain you. You stop maintaining connections built on versions of you that no longer exist. You start listening, truly listening, to the subtle signals your consciousness has always been sending, but you were too distracted to hear. The tightening in your chest when something isn't right. The calm in your body when something aligns. The intuitive pull that makes no logical sense but feels undeniably true. This is the language of your deeper self, the one you abandoned to survive, but now must reconnect with to evolve. And as you tune into this inner intelligence, you begin to make choices that reflect who you actually are, not who you once pretended to be. You start stepping away from environments that dim your awareness. You stop playing small to fit into spaces your soul has outgrown. You learn to say no without guilt and yes without fear. Your life becomes simpler, cleaner, more precise. The noise fades. The clarity strengthens. The alignment deepens. And for the first time, you feel like you're living in your own timeline, not someone else's script. People may not understand this shift. Some will say you've changed. Some will say you've become distant. Some will say you've become different, but what they're actually witnessing is the version of you that no longer bends to the expectations of others, the version that finally recognizes its own essence. You stop needing external approval because your internal foundation is becoming unshakable. You stop fearing loss because you're no longer willing to lose yourself. You stop resisting discomfort because you understand it as a doorway to expansion. At this stage of your awakening, something subtle but life-altering begins to happen. You stop reacting to life and start responding to it. There is a difference so profound it reshapes your entire existence. Reaction comes from the unconscious self, the one shaped by wounds, conditioned patterns, and old memories. Response comes from awareness, the part of you that sees clearly, chooses intentionally, and acts from alignment rather than fear. And the moment you begin responding instead of reacting, reality starts shifting in ways that feel almost surreal. You notice that situations which once triggered you now dissolve before gaining momentum. Conversations that once left you drained no longer have the power to enter your emotional space. Problems that once felt overwhelming now appear as temporary, waves passing through a much wider ocean of consciousness. You become the ocean, not the waves. This phase reveals one of the deepest truths of awakening. When you change the level of consciousness you operate from, the world cannot meet you the same way it used to. People who once pushed your boundaries now sense your inner strength and adjust automatically. Patterns that once repeated in your life lose their fuel and fall away. Even the chaos around you becomes easier to navigate because you're no longer vibrating at the frequency of that chaos. Life doesn't become easy. You become grounded. And from that grounding rises a new quality within you. Neutrality. Not apathy, not detachment, but a powerful centered neutrality that keeps you anchored regardless of what's happening around you. You begin to see events without immediately projecting meaning onto them. You observe emotions without drowning in them. You witness your thoughts without assuming they are commands. This is the birth of inner mastery. You realize that the mind was never meant to be your ruler, only a tool. Emotions were never meant to imprison you, only guide you. Circumstances were never meant to define you, only mirror you. And once you grasp this, you stop chasing control and start cultivating clarity. You stop fighting the flow of life and start syncing with it. You stop resisting what is and begin working with what is. This is where your presence upgrades into something unmistakably powerful. Not loud, not forceful, not aggressive, but unmistakably felt. People notice it before you say a word. They sense the calm. They sense the clarity. They sense the way you occupy yourself fully, rather than leaking your energy into doubts, fears, or imagined futures. Your presence becomes your influence. And the more grounded you become in this state, the more you understand. Awakening is less about becoming something new and more about shedding everything that keeps you from being who you already are. You are not transforming into a higher version of yourself. You are remembering the version that existed before life convinced you to shrink. The moment you begin to question the world that was handed to you, something ancient inside you stirs. A memory older than your body, older than your mind, older even than the history you were taught to believe. It's the moment you stop accepting reality as a fixed stage and start seeing it for what it truly is. A living field responding to you, reshaping itself according to the frequency you carry. Most people never reach this point. They spend their lives reacting, adjusting, shrinking, complying, never realizing that the very fabric they bow down to is quietly waiting for them to take command. Because the truth is unsettlingly simple. Your consciousness is not a passenger in this universe. It is an operator, a catalyst, a tuning fork that bends the invisible architecture of your life. Every thought, every emotion, every expectation sends out a subtle command, and reality, obedient, precise, almost too literal, echoes it back. This is why the same patterns repeat. This is why the same obstacles return. This is why people feel trapped inside loops they never consciously chose. They don't realize they're broadcasting the loop, fueling it, reinforcing it through the electricity of their own inner dialogue. But once you see the mechanism, the loop can no longer hold you, because you start to notice how the world shifts when you shift. How opportunities appear not by coincidence, but by alignment. How people enter your life the moment your internal state becomes compatible with the version of yourself you're stepping into. How obstacles dissolve not because the universe suddenly likes you, but because you stopped vibrating at the frequency that created them. This is the pivot point most people never reach, the moment you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and instead ask, "What am I transmitting that's generating this reality?" It's a dangerous question. Dangerous in the best possible way. Because the moment you ask it, you reclaim something most people have surrendered long ago. Authorship. You stop being a character in a script you never wrote. You become the scriptwriter, and the universe, which once looked random, chaotic, unfair, begins to reveal its structure to you. You start to see the invisible threads, connecting your inner world to your outer world. You begin to feel the subtle yet unmistakable feedback loop between intention and manifestation. And most importantly, you begin to understand that nothing in your reality is fixed, unless you freeze it with your belief. There is no destiny written in stone, only frequencies waiting for you to choose them. And the moment you choose differently, truly, unapologetically, energetically, the entire field begins to rearrange itself around the new version of you. There comes a moment on this path when you notice something strange. Reality doesn't resist you anymore. It doesn't push back with the same heaviness. It doesn't echo your fears with the same intensity. It begins to feel almost cooperative, not because life suddenly became easier, but because your internal resonance finally stopped contradicting your own desires. Most people live in contradiction. They want peace but vibrate chaos. They want abundance but vibrate scarcity. They want love but vibrate fear. And then they wonder why the universe feels cold, unresponsive, indifferent. But the universe is none of those things. It is simply accurate. It mirrors what you broadcast with a precision that is almost unsettling. But when the contradiction dissolves, when your intention, emotion, and identity point in the same direction, you unlock a level of coherence most humans never experience. And coherence is power. Coherence is clarity. Coherence is the moment your energy stops leaking into doubt and begins pouring into creation. The moment the field around you stops fragmenting and begins aligning. The moment the reality matrix recognizes a stable signal and adjusts itself accordingly. This is where manifestations that once felt impossible begin to arrive naturally, effortlessly, not as miracles but as consequences. Because the universe does not reward effort, it responds to frequency. And once your frequency stabilizes, once your inner state becomes consistent, the external world has no choice but to follow the blueprint you're emitting. But this stage also comes with a deeper realization. Nothing you are attracting is new. You are not summoning things from the void. You are tuning into versions of reality that already existed, waiting for you to resonate with them. Infinite possibilities were always there, branching endlessly. You simply weren't aligned with the one you wanted. Now you are. And with that alignment comes a responsibility that few are prepared for. The responsibility of becoming the version of yourself that matches the reality you seek. Not pretending, not visualizing, becoming. Because the universe does not respond to who you wish to be. It responds to who you are right now. At this stage, growth becomes less about adding things to yourself and more about removing everything that distorts your signal. You start releasing old narratives, outdated fears, inherited beliefs, and emotional echoes that no longer belong to the frequency you're embodying. You're not fixing yourself, you're shedding versions of you that were never real to begin with. And as you shed, your reality brightens, synchronicities multiply, moments of clarity become more frequent. Life begins to speak to you through patterns, symbols, and perfectly timed encounters. Not because you're special, but because you're finally tuned in. You're finally listening. You're finally coherent. And coherence is the beginning of mastery. There's a threshold you cross on this journey where your old identity no longer fits you. It feels tight, outdated, like a shell you've outgrown but kept wearing out of habit. And when that shell finally begins to crack, something extraordinary happens. The world stops responding to who you were and begins responding to who you're becoming. But this transition is not gentle. It feels like standing between two worlds, the world you've known and the world you're calling into existence. One pulls you backward with memories, patterns, and familiar fears. The other pulls you forward with intuition, possibility, and a quiet sense of inevitability. And you feel the tension between them like gravity shifting inside your chest. This is the stage where most people retreat. They sense the old identity dissolving, and instead of trusting the process, they panic. They cling to what feels familiar, even if it suffocates them. They mistake discomfort for danger. They label expansion as instability. They confuse the death of old patterns with the loss of themselves. But you're learning to recognize the truth. The discomfort is not a sign you're breaking. It's a sign you're breaking free. Because every identity you outgrow leaves behind an echo, and that echo tries to call you back. It whispers old doubts, old stories, old versions of you that once felt safe, but you're no longer powered by those stories. You can feel them weakening. You can feel the narrative shifting. You can feel reality bending toward the signal of your new self. This is the metamorphosis people talk about but rarely understand. Transformation isn't glamorous. It's disorienting. It's lonely. It feels like losing control when in truth you're finally reclaiming it. You're shedding the emotional contracts that kept you small. You're dissolving internal agreements you never consciously made. You're stepping out of frequencies you inherited, absorbed or unconsciously repeated. And as those layers fall away, something astonishing emerges. Clarity. Not the mental clarity you get from thinking harder, but the clarity that comes from alignment. The kind that rearranges your perception. The kind that makes your old limitations feel absurd. The kind that reveals choices you didn't even know existed. Because when the old identity collapses, it frees the energy that was trapped inside it. Energy that now returns to you. Energy that rebuilds you. Energy that pulls you into the highest timeline you were always meant to inhabit. You begin to act differently, speak differently, notice differently. You stop negotiating with your fears and start negotiating with your future. You stop asking, "What if I fail?" and start asking, "What if this is exactly who I was designed to become?" And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, a deeper truth rises within you. You were never meant to fit into the life you're leaving behind. You were meant to evolve into the one that's waiting ahead. There comes a point in your evolution where you stop chasing signs and start becoming one. Not because you figured everything out, but because you finally understand that the universe doesn't speak in words, it speaks in reflections. And once your inner world shifts, those reflections begin to change with an accuracy that feels almost supernatural. You'll notice it in small ways at first. A conversation that answers a question you never asked out loud. A person who appears at the exact moment you were ready for them. Doors that were locked for years suddenly opening without effort. Patterns you once struggled to break simply dissolving, as if they were held together only by the version of you who no longer exists. This is the stage where alignment becomes undeniable, where your intuition stops feeling like a whisper and starts feeling like a current pulling you forward, where coincidences become too precise to dismiss, where you start realizing that reality is not responding to what you think you want, it's responding to who you are. And the more you embody your new self, the more the external world recalibrates to match you. But this phase also reveals something deeper. The universe was never testing you. It was waiting for you, waiting for your frequency to stabilize, waiting for you to release old identities that were jamming your signal, waiting for you to stop arguing with your own potential, waiting for you to stop outsourcing your power to circumstances, people, and past experiences. Because once you stop doubting your energy, reality stops doubting you. This is when you begin to feel a strange sensation, like life is rearranging itself faster than you can mentally process. Like the future is leaning toward you instead of away from you. Like you're walking through a corridor where every step reveals a door that wasn't there a moment ago. That feeling is not imagination. It's resonance. And resonance is the engine of manifestation. At this level, your thoughts carry weight. Your intentions have gravity. Your emotions imprint themselves onto the field with a sharpness they never had before. Which is why your manifestations accelerate, not because you're getting better at anything, but because there's less interference coming from the old you. Your energy is finally clean, and the universe responds to clean energy instantly. But here's the part most people overlook. When you reach this stage, you no longer seek validation from the external world. You no longer wait for signs to confirm your direction. You don't need omens, angel numbers, tarot cards, or cosmic reassurance. Not because those things aren't real, they are. But because you've become the clearest signal in your own life. Your alignment becomes your confirmation. Your intuition becomes your compass. Your frequency becomes your evidence. And in that moment, the universe stops feeling like something outside of you. There is a moment in your transformation where you begin to sense a truth you once would have rejected. You are no longer the person your past remembers. And because of that, the past can no longer claim you. The emotions, the wounds, the failures, the stories, they still echo, but they no longer define the shape of your reality. You start to feel an inner distance from the life you once lived. As if you've stepped out of a costume you didn't know you were wearing. This is the emergence of your new operating system, a shift so deep it doesn't start in your mind, but in your energy. You notice it when old triggers lose their power, when things that once shattered you barely create a ripple, when behaviors you used to tolerate now feel impossible to accept, when your boundaries strengthen not out of anger, but out of clarity. It's not that you've become colder, it's that you've become aligned. And alignment has a side effect most people don't expect. You stop participating in your own suffering. You stop feeding the cycles that drained you. You stop replaying the stories that kept you trapped. You stop living as a reaction to your past and start living as an expression of your potential. But this stage brings with it a strange and almost uncomfortable realization: the people around you may not recognize the new you. Some will pull closer, sensing your shift. Others will drift away, confused by the version of you they can no longer access. And a few will try to hold you to who you used to be, not because they're malicious, but because your growth exposes their stagnation. Understand this: you're not losing people. You're losing the frequencies you once shared with them. And as those frequencies fall away, your internal space begins to expand. You start feeling a quiet power rising within you, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakably real. A power that doesn't need to impress, argue, or prove anything. A power that comes from knowing you're finally aligned with yourself, not with the expectations that once shaped you. This is where your life begins to mirror your inner state with a precision that feels almost surgical. The wrong paths collapse. The right ones emerge. New ideas appear seemingly out of nowhere. Opportunities align with your identity instead of your desperation. You begin to attract from intention rather than survival. Because the universe isn't responding to your wants, it's responding to your being. And your being has changed. The more you embody this new frequency, the more reality rearranges itself around you. People who match your new energy find their way to you effortlessly. Environments that resonate with your growth become magnetic. Even your challenges evolve. They stop being punishments and start becoming upgrades. And slowly, steadily, undeniably, you begin to understand something profound. You were never evolving toward your true self. You were evolving back into it. There is a phase in your evolution where you begin to sense the architecture of your own reality, subtle, invisible, but undeniably present. It's the moment you realize that nothing in your life is random. Not the breakthroughs, not the delays, not the people who arrive or the ones who disappear. Everything is responding to a blueprint that has been inside you the entire time. A blueprint you were shaping long before you were conscious of it. This is where awareness becomes power. You start noticing how your internal world precedes your external world, like lightning before thunder. A shift in your emotion creates a shift in your environment. A decision you make ripples outward in ways you don't fully understand until the results come back to you, and you begin to feel something astonishing. You're not navigating reality, you're generating it. But with this realization comes a deeper responsibility, because once you see that you're the architect, you can no longer pretend you're the victim. You can't blame luck, fate, or circumstance. You can't hide inside old narratives that once gave you comfort. You can't pretend your energy isn't influencing the path ahead. You become accountable, not in a heavy way, but in a liberating one. You finally understand that your power was never missing. It was merely misdirected. And now, as your alignment strengthens, your misalignment becomes painfully obvious. Anything that contradicts your new frequency feels intolerable. Environments that once felt normal now feel suffocating. Conversations you used to engage in now drain you instantly. You begin to feel what your intuition has been trying to tell you for years. Your energy has outgrown the life built around your previous self. This stage is often misunderstood. It's not about cutting people off. It's not about burning bridges. It's not about isolating yourself. It's about recognizing that evolution is an energetic process, and not everyone is meant to climb every level with you. As you rise, the world rearranges itself, not to reward you, but to match you. You start to attract opportunities that resonate with your upgraded identity. Doors that once seemed locked swing open without effort. Ideas flow with clarity, timing aligns, and life begins to feel like a series of perfectly placed stepping stones. Not because the path suddenly appeared, but because you finally tuned into the version of yourself capable of walking it. And with each step, a deeper truth becomes undeniable. You are not becoming someone new. You are peeling back everything that kept you from recognizing who you've always been. The intelligence guiding you is not external. It's encoded in your consciousness. The roadmap ahead is not unknown, you're remembering it. The future you're moving toward is not distant, it's vibrating inside you right now. Because once you reach this level of alignment, you stop chasing transformation and begin embodying inevitability. There comes a final threshold in this journey, a point where transformation stops feeling like a process and starts feeling like your natural state. You're no longer becoming anything. You're no longer forcing shifts, healing old wounds, or chasing higher versions of yourself. Instead, you begin to embody something deeper, something quieter, something far more powerful than effort or intention. You begin to embody truth. And this truth doesn't arrive with fireworks or dramatic revelations. It arrives subtly, like a calm certainty settling into your bones. A knowing that doesn't need explanation. A presence that doesn't need validation. A strength that doesn't need to announce itself. It's the moment your soul finally exhales because you've stopped living in contradiction with yourself. You start to realize that your power was never in the manifestations, the synchronicities, the signs, or the breakthroughs. Those were just reflections, echoes of a deeper shift happening within you. The real power was you, your consciousness, your alignment, your willingness to release the identities that weren't yours, your courage to step into frequencies that demanded your evolution. This final stage is not about controlling reality, it's about harmonizing with it. You stop asking for things to change because you've become the version of you who naturally attracts what aligns. You stop begging for signs because your intuition is louder than anything outside you. You stop questioning your path because your energy is finally guiding you with unmistakable clarity. Life stops feeling like a puzzle you're trying to solve and begins feeling like a field you're co-creating in real time. And here is the ultimate shift. You stop living from memory and start living from possibility. Your past becomes reference, not residence. Your fears become data, not destiny. Your challenges become initiation, not punishment. Every version of you that once held pain, doubt, or limitation dissolves like mist in sunlight. Not because it wasn't real, but because it never matched the truth of who you actually are. And now, as that truth rises fully into your awareness, you begin to understand why the journey felt so chaotic, so intense, so transformative. It wasn't breaking you, it was unmasking you, peeling away every illusion, every inherited belief, every emotional echo that wasn't aligned with your core frequency. And now, standing here at the edge of who you once were, you feel something profound. You're no longer waiting for your reality to shift. Your reality is waiting for you to step forward. You've crossed the threshold where intention turns into embodiment, where alignment turns into gravity, where your presence alone influences the field around you. This is the final stage, not an ending, but an ignition. The moment where your energy becomes undeniable, the moment where your path becomes inevitable.